Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on QVscribe for Polarion. We've been excited for a long time to put this on and finally take the wraps off of this. So we've developed this integration in partnership with Polarion over the last 18 months or so. And our first customers have started using it towards the end of 2020. And this is our first kind of webinar and live presentation that we've done on it. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Polarion, I'll start with just a quick introduction of what that is. It is a requirements management tool. So similar to IBM Doors or tools like Jama, it's a place other than Word and Excel where you can write your requirements, manage your requirements, and then also connect and trace and have approval levels and everything like that. And it acts as a centralized library where you can manipulate and manage this information in ways that just aren't possible with Word and Excel. So basically, as you're moving through the process, if you're not currently using a requirements management tool, you will, as your company keeps growing and you keep developing new and more complex products, you'll reach a point where the tools like Word and Excel just aren't good enough to trace everything and keep it all together. And that's where a tool like Polarion comes in. So we'd love to hear your opinion after this. There will be a survey, as you can see, place for your name so we know how to get in touch with you if we'd like to follow, if you request a follow-up. But it's just two questions. How likely are you recommend this to a friend or colleague, assuming that this would be relevant to them? And then why did you choose this number? So we always take this feedback into our webinars. So when we're preparing for future ones, we take that feedback into account so that we can always improve and make it relevant to what you want to hear. So if you'd like to see more of a focus on one aspect or another, please, by all means, share your feedback with us. So some reasons why people choose Polarion. It's a web-based tool for requirements management. Like I mentioned a moment ago, it offers a great traceability function, so you can see how each requirement connects to the others that are a part of that system, and you can trace it back so that when your high-level requirements, you need to verify and validate that those have been met. You can trace it all the way through to the specific requirements that contribute to meeting that. Also, the ease of use. It's a modern interface, so the way that users can learn how to use it and click around and find what they're looking for is best in the business. And then also there's flexible workflows. And a key feature, which I'll show in just a second, is the live docs view. So for customers that are transitioning from a document-based approach where they have everything written up in a tool like Word or Excel, being able to transition over using the live doc view within Polarion is very helpful in making that transition. So I'll show, just for those that aren't familiar with Polarion, what it is that we're talking about here. So this is the requirements management tool. You can see you have your dashboard over here on the side, and then similar to other similar tools like this, you do also have your list of requirements here, and you can click on any one of them to look at a detailed description of that requirement, see things like the status and severity, who wrote it, edit history, and things like that are all available within the tool itself. So next question might be for some of you on the call, what is QVscribe? So QVscribe is a requirements quality tool, and we first developed the tool a few years back for Microsoft Word and then added support for Excel. So most of our existing customers at that time were writing their requirements in Word or in Excel. And then once they were approved and kind of reached that first level where they were going to start working at those requirements, then they'd be uploaded into the requirements management tool of choice. So something like IBM Doors was popular for a lot of our customers, and we have several customers that are using Polarion as well. And what's changed over the last few years and why we developed this integration with Polarion was that more and more as projects are getting more complex, we found that more of our customers that are using a requirements management tool are actually starting there because you can build the traceability in right from the start rather than taking a document and then uploading it into the requirements management tool later. You can get your traceability in right at the beginning. And then more and more customers are actually leaving Word and Excel behind for the most part and moving into a requirements management tool like this. So this is one of three products that we have on this new platform. The other ones are IBM Doors Next and Jama, which will be available. We have customers using it now. The commercial release will be coming later this month, so watch for a tutorial for that. And we actually have a live tutorial coming up next week for Doors Next as well, which will be hosted by our very own Rebecca Labby. So stay tuned for that as well. But starting out, we have our customers working primarily in Microsoft Word, and then our users that have a requirements management tool, we have different workflows for working with those management tools with Excel. So if you have the requirements already existing in the management tool, you can export as a CSV or an Excel, run the analysis within QVscribe in just a couple minutes, and then update those results as a round trip back into the management tool. But what we found is that more and more customers were keeping everything in the requirements management tool. Different tools have different features for collaboration and even bringing your different stakeholders involved so that they can view the requirements within those tools. So it became important for us to start looking into how we could integrate with those tools to avoid that step of having to take the requirements out of the place where you have all of your traceability and all of your edit permissions and everything like that all built in, and then be making changes with it outside of the tool. So what this looks like, and we'll go through sort of what we're seeing as a part of this analysis, but we've designed two workflows for Polarion. So basically from the description view here, when you're looking at this is actually the table view within Polarion. When you're looking at an individual requirement, you can see that when this is actually open to be edited, we've inserted a QVscribe icon here. So this is done through a browser extension, currently runs in Google Chrome with support for Edge. There's customers using it in Edge now. We're adding official support for it very soon. But the extension runs here so that when the extension recognizes that there's a Polarion window open, it knows where the description field is and can insert the QVscribe icon there. So this is actually just reading the text directly within that box here. So what this means is unless the user has permission to edit this requirement, they don't have permission to make changes with it with QVscribe. So when you open QVscribe, it takes you from that plain document view where you're just looking at the text itself into this view where you're actually given feedback on how you can improve the quality of the requirements. So the user is able to go in here, make changes to the text, and they'll see the score get updated as they make changes here. When they close this out, this takes them back and it actually updates the text field within Polarion, and then they can commit those changes through the normal workflow that they would have. So that's one workflow, and we're going to work through a document here a little bit later on the call. The other view is our summary view, and this is where we actually used Polarion's APIs to be able to read the database and see the set of requirements together. So you can see right now this view that I'm looking at within Polarion has 160 requirements that are currently visible if I scroll down that list. So if I click the QVscribe icon at the top here, that's going to bring me into a view that shows me the overall quality of this whole set of requirements together. So you can see how many requirements achieved each score based on the configuration that I have chosen. And then we also have our quality warnings, which don't impact the score, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And then we can also view a summary of each individual requirement, as well as the term consistency, which is different terms that are used throughout all of those requirements together. Same thing for units, and then a similarity analysis. So the purpose of this view is to take that whole set that you're looking at, and you can actually use the filters within Polarion to determine which requirements you actually want to look at, what you consider a set that you want to see. Bring it into this view, and you can get a sense of the overall quality. If I click on the quality analysis here, this will actually take me into a view where I can see what is contributing to that overall score that I have. So I can see each requirement with the individual quality score listed next to it. And as I scroll down, you can see that there's also quality warnings associated with them. So this allows you to look at the information as a whole. And then if you see something that says, hey, why is this one a 4 out of 5? Maybe I'll click on that and get some more detail. And you can see that the reason for the score of 4 out of 5 is that we have excessive use of continuances. So there's actually more than 2 in this case. So that's what triggered this warning. And that's using too many ands and ors within the same requirement. And the recommendation here is, if necessary, you would split that into multiple requirements. So the user is given this feedback as they're working through it to actually improve the quality of the written requirement as they go along. And we'll jump back into that with a little bit more detail here in a few minutes. I just wanted to give that quick introduction to Polarion and QVscribe so that we're on the same page here getting started. So jumping out for a second, one of the reasons that we developed this integration with Polarion, like I mentioned before, is that's what a lot of our customers are using. And it also aligns well with our vision for requirement quality. So if you look overall at sort of the landscape right now in the industries that we serve. It's very similar industries to the groups that Polarian's working with, but there's a huge amount of change going on right now. Of course, with the pandemic, there's extra stress on businesses almost universally. People are expected to do more with less and are trying to figure out how to pivot and adjust their business. But aside from the overall issues that are affecting us all in different ways, each industry is also going through some pretty significant changes right now. If I look at our contacts in oil and gas, which is quickly becoming the energy industry as they undergo this huge process of transformation to the clean energy transition. So a lot of the traditional oil and gas companies that are out there are being forced to learn new skills, to adapt new technologies, and to develop new technologies for the changing landscape as we transition to renewable energy. You look at automotive, moving from, again, fossil fuels to moving to electric vehicles, and then also at the same time, there's this autonomous driving trend that is going to continue to grow and is continuing to develop more momentum as different companies emerge from there. If you look at aerospace, you have the huge disruption being caused by privatization right now. You can go to medical devices, where now just the pace of innovation and how quickly technology is changing and advancing. You have medical devices now that are literally being controlled by interfacing with your brain directly, and surgeries being performed at the microscopic level with a degree of precision that humans just couldn't do on our own. And it's just amazing to see what's happening in all these different industries. But what that does to the people that are responsible for developing and managing these projects is the level of complexity continues to increase. And as a result, it's more and more difficult to keep up, and your old processes won't necessarily work. So that's why we see more people moving towards requirements management tools and getting the benefits of that traceability, like I had mentioned earlier. But there are some things that are just true about requirements management in general. And there's a couple of statistics that are kind of hard to wrap your mind around. So I have a deck of cards here. This actually has 3 cards missing from it. So I've taken out 3 red cards. And in this deck, we now have 47% of the cards in here are red. And why that's significant is that if you take a look, there was a report done a few years ago now by the Project Management Institute called the Pulse of the Profession. And they did a Pulse of the Profession on requirements quality and requirements management. And what they found was, if you took all of the projects across various industries, different large organizations that they had surveyed, they actually found that 47% of failed projects, so something that didn't meet its original goals, 47% of the time, when you trace back the primary reason why that project failed to meet its goals, 47% of the time it's traced back to the requirements. So if I take a look at the deck of cards that I have here, and I've been shuffling here for the last few minutes as I've been talking, if I pull up a random card here, first one's red. So if this was a failed project, maybe this one was a misinterpreted requirement that as a result, you had to go back and redo a bunch of work that you didn't realize that that requirement didn't mean what you thought it meant. So there's one. Next one, okay, another red card. So maybe on this project, the requirements were written in such a way that you had too many requirements trying to fit within one requirement statement, and something just got missed there. So there was a whole aspect of this product or a feature that it was supposed to have that wasn't accounted for, and as a result, that one missed. So next one, we have another red card. So again, maybe a problem with the requirements. So if that could ultimately be traced back to the requirements, maybe it wasn't that it was misunderstood or that there was a requirement that was missing, but maybe it was lost in the process. So you wrote the requirement and then it didn't make it through to the next level because you didn't have the right traceability in place. And as a result, that project failed to meet its goals. Finally, we get a black one. So black one, maybe there was a design error that happened. Something was clearly expressed in the requirements and they missed it. Next one's red again. So you can see if I go through a few more, red, red, there's a black one. But 47% of the time, as I go through these here, the problem can be traced back to the requirements. So more than half of, or almost half of these projects, if you were to take a stack of almost 50, you would find that the primary reason that the company itself identified that this project failed was poor requirements. But there's some other interesting numbers in that report, and that is the difference in cost overruns. So on average, it's around 5% or so if you take the average between the two. But there's a big difference in companies that value and invest in the requirements process versus those who don't consider that as a strength or a core competency for their organization. So for organizations that have strong requirements practices, about 1% of their overall project cost increase are directly due to poor requirements. If you take the other end of the spectrum, there are companies that don't value requirements and don't have strong processes in place for training and bringing their teams, teaching them the best practices for requirement writing, don't have that expertise as a core competency. It's somewhere up around 10. So for all project cost increases that a project takes on, that difference can be tenfold if you have a good requirements process versus if you don't. So when we're talking about this today, looking at the way that QVscribe helps users improve their requirements within Polarion, it's really, there's two sides to the issue. So there is the requirements traceability and managing your requirements well, which is why many of you have chosen Polarion as the tool of choice for that. And then the other aspect of it is the quality of the requirements themselves. So when we talk about why we chose to work with Polarion, they have experience in working with complex products. That was the design about 15 years ago when Polarion was introduced, was to solve real problems that people were having with tracing their requirements and being able to make a modern tool that would help with this. So they were the first web-based browser-based tool for requirements management. They have a strong partner program and powerful APIs. So when we took the QVscribe for the web platform that we had developed and looked how to connect that with the Polarion interface, their API library allowed us to be able to connect and get the information that we needed to make a seamless experience for the user. And then the biggest reason why we chose Polarion is that because you did. So a number of our customers were using Polarion already. And like I mentioned before, it just makes it that much more of a seamless experience if you're dealing with your, the problems that Polarion solves and the problems that QVscribe solves. If you can do that all in one place, and what you'll see in a moment is from the experience of the user themselves, it really is deeply integrated. So, they wouldn't know when they're leaving Polarion, when they're working with QVscribe, because it all happens there within the browser. So why is requirement writing so challenging? We mentioned this earlier, that there's certain organizations that have the skills developed in this. Even certain industries are more mature in this than others, but it varies a lot. So you'd have the people that are actually responsible for writing requirements in these different industries can vary. So you would have an actual requirements engineer in a few industries that we work in, where their job is to write the requirements and develop them and then pass them on to the next stage, and then they move on to the requirement writing for the next. Other industries might have a business analyst or a project owner who's responsible for that project, who's meeting with stakeholders and developing those requirements. In others, it's the actual engineers themselves. Think of like medical devices. A lot of the times, the people that are working on the development are also the ones responsible for writing those requirements. So there's a huge variance in who's writing these requirements. And there's a whole different dynamic to the way that we hear our customers talk about their experience with them, because for the person who's a dedicated requirements engineer, they don't always have the experience of saying, okay, well, we know how this project has gone wrong later on based on a misinterpreted requirement or a poorly written requirement or a missing requirement. And so it's harder to gain that kind of real world knowledge of how their work impacts the future work. But at the same time, people that are experienced in requirement writing are more focused on learning the best practices and developing those skills. And so there's a sort of trade-off where you have people learning from experience, and then you also have this sort of expertise that is developed through training and taking courses and studying. And then you also have these kind of processes that you put in place. So a guidance that an organization sets up to say, hey, here are the rules that we're going to follow. And so from that perspective is where we're going to be talking for the next few minutes, is how an organization can take control of their requirements process using Polarion within QVscribe within Polarion. So one of the big issues is that requirement writing is at the same time an objective thing, in that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And at the same time, it's very subjective. So I'll give a really easy example of that is it's universally accepted that whether you're working with a medical device, or you're developing standards for an oil and gas project, or you're writing requirements for a satellite, it's understood that the requirement should be unambiguous. You know, you need to be clear about what you actually mean when you write the requirement. So don't be vague. Whether you have a list of 500 rules, which some of our customers have that they try to encourage their teams to follow, or maybe a list of 3 that maybe you get from, say, the FDA that says, you know, your requirements need to be internally concise with each other, they need to be consistent, and they need to be unambiguous. Unambiguous is always there. So whether you're looking at INCOSE standards or IEEE or any course that you take, they'll always say, don't be vague. So the problem there and why it's subjective is that that is in itself a vague requirement, because you could have one person here, oh, okay, I need to make my requirement not vague, and they'll write a requirement a certain way. Somebody else can pick up that same requirement and go, I'm not really sure what this is trying to say, so I'm going to go back and get clarification on that. So the person that wrote it is sort of blind to that, because as the person who wrote the requirement, of course it's clear to them. They understand what they're saying because they're the ones that wrote it. So it's very difficult for the person actually doing the writing to have an objective opinion about the requirement that they're looking at, because they understand the subject matter and they know what it is that they're trying to express, even if they haven't done that clearly. So you have standards in place like the INCOSE guide for writing requirements. IEEE has a few rules as well that they encourage you to follow. And then even you know, unified body, notified bodies like the FDA and things have rules in place basically that says, hey, your requirements need to follow these set procedures and practices. And so the reason that, you know, integrating with Polarion was important for us is that this is a universal problem. So anywhere that somebody is writing requirements, I think of the blank page here. If you're writing requirements in natural language, no matter what tool you're using to do that, the same problems exist. So if I was just using a text editor and typing the requirements in, or if I was using Microsoft Word and had a Word document open and had to type a requirement, or Excel, or other management tools that are out there, or Polarion, at the end of the day, somebody needs to describe what it is that this product is supposed to do, or what this project is supposed to accomplish. And that's the purpose of writing requirements in natural language. You can convey very complex ideas in a way that anybody who's involved in the project can read it and understand what this thing is supposed to do. They might not be able to code it themselves or be able to describe how everything works, but they can read that natural language requirement and get an understanding. Oh, when this happens, this is what the device does, or this is what the product does, or this is what the project will accomplish. And that's how you get your stakeholders on board. So it's very important that when you're writing these requirements in natural language, that it's clearly expressing the idea that you want to bring across. So there's that blurred line of objective and subjective. So when we're looking at our approach to this problem is that you can't measure everything. And so we've divided those two into 2 separate groups. You have the objective side of the QVscribe analysis and the subjective side. So the objective side is our quality scoring system. And as an objective measure, this is looking for things like uniformity. So when we say uniformity, that's consistent use of language. So if you're saying all of our requirements that are mandatory, which every requirement should be, would have a shall statement. So it's saying clearly this shall happen. When this particular event happens, this is what we want the response to be. The contractor is going to fulfill their obligation. They shall do this. And if you're using that language inconsistently, a lot of the time you'll be missing a shall statement in some places, or you'll have something that's written as a requirement, but it's not really a requirement, so it doesn't belong there. And so the objective QVscribe analysis is looking for that uniformity. It's going to make sure that every requirement has one and only one shall statement, but that's customizable. So if you're using will instead of shall for a project, then you can tell QVscribe that that's what you want it to look for. And any words that are on that list, it will make sure that each requirement is singular in its intent. And the other part of singularity, which I showed a second ago, is the excessive continuances. So, you know, if you're saying something like, you know, research and development will do this, that's usually pretty clear to be able to follow that requirement. But when you get into more than 2 of ands and ors and buts within the same requirement, it can become difficult to, you know, sort of map out what that requirement's saying. And so QVscribe can flag when that type of language is used as well. And then the last one on the list of objective items is ambiguity. And now we've divided the QVscribe analysis up into different categories based on the INCOSE guide for writing requirements. So it's not just saying that this is ambiguous, but it will say this contains an immeasurable quantification, or this has a extra verb in it, a superfluous infinitive, as they call it in the INCOSE guide, and actually give specific feedback on how to remedy that issue. So the reason this is important is that it allows you to take something that is subjective, like don't use any vague words, and actually make it objective. So without a tool to analyze this and keep track of all this for you, you can't possibly teach people, to keep track of these hundreds of words that are okay in some places and not okay in other documents. Or the last job that I worked, we were okay with saying this, and now at this job I don't. And so the objective side of the QVscribe analysis is a single source of truth where you have a library of words that you've determined, we are not going to use this language, specifically this language in our documents. And that's going to help make sure that as we're writing the requirement that we're being clear, that the intent, anybody who reads it will understand what the device is supposed to do or what the project is supposed to accomplish, because we've ruled out all of this language that is inherently vague and is not appropriate for a requirements document. So from our perspective here at QRA, we've taken those best practices from the customers that we've worked with, along with articles like the INCOSI guide and different training courses and things that are out there for requirement writing, and taken our interpretation of that. A list like this didn't exist before to say, these are all of the words that are too vague for a requirements document. So when you first install QVscribe, there's around 375 keywords in these different categories that have been identified for these different purposes. So you'd have, your list of vague words, your list of immeasurable quantifications, your list of optional escape clauses. And this is fully customizable. So if there's something in the QVscribe analysis, it's objective, so you know why you're getting that score. And so the reader, when they're presented with something from QVscribe, they know why they're getting the score that it's given, and they know that it's not just the opinion of the tool, but actually the organization or the management that has reviewed that and said, this is language that we've agreed to. And so that helps keep everybody on the same page. And you'll see a little bit later, you can actually have different configurations for different purposes as well. So a process that's for a team that's less mature in their requirements development practices, they might just take the standard QRA configuration, maybe take a couple of tweaks to it and say, look, if we can just get everybody to follow this, then we'll be like way ahead of where we are right now. But for other organizations that have a more mature process in place already, they can actually take the practices that they already have and then fine tune those configurations to give the users the precise feedback that they want and to help get consistency in the language that's used. So that's the objective side of things. Of course, that saves time in the process, because when somebody's writing a document, they can immediately see the issues that have concern, where they need to reword something or be more specific. That becomes very clear to them. But it saves time in the process as well when you go to review that document. So we've often heard from our customers, 50%, 75% less time spent reviewing these documents because they've already achieved a level of clarity on their own just by the authors working with QVscribe as they go. So the other side of things is the subjective side. So on these, it's not always clear what the right answer is. And these would include quality warnings, consistency checks, and our similarity analysis. So I'll give an example of a quality warning. That would be like a universal quantifier. If you've used the word all, or every, or any. So these words are very common in kind of natural language just as you're talking in conversation, but when you use them in a casual way in a requirements document, it can expand the scope of what you're actually asking for way beyond what you intended. So if you're working on a system for a car and the driver needs to be notified whenever there's an error, so you might say that the driver will be notified of any errors on the dashboard, for example. So, well, what would you mean by all? What do you mean by every? So if it loses signal on its satellite radio, is it supposed to give an alert on the dashboard? If a tire pressure, a tire pressure warning comes on, is that supposed to come on the dashboard? Yes, it probably is. But by saying all, the engineer and the testing team is now responsible to look at every possible error that could happen and make sure that that's taking place on the screen. So it's always better to be more specific there, but there's sometimes when there's just not the ability to list out everything that you mean, because it really does mean all. So it'll warn the user when those are used, but it doesn't impact the quality score. The other ones that are part of the subjective side are consistency checks, so looking for the consistent use of terms and units within the document. These don't impact the score, but it's presenting the information to the user in a way that they can more quickly analyze what they're writing and make sure that it's consistent across a set. Because as the projects become more complex, you have more and more requirements that need to be considered. So finding those, making sure that you're using the same terms throughout can be difficult. And then lastly within that is the similarity analysis. So we'll show you requirements that are most likely to potentially have a conflict or perhaps have missing information because they're very similar to one another. That doesn't mean that you know, we're going to give a score and say these two are very close and it's okay, and these two are very close and that's not okay, because that requires the subject matter expert, the person who's actually writing the requirements, to determine, hey, is there a conflict here? Do I really need both of these requirements? But by bringing them to the attention of the user, rather than finding something, you know, scrolling through the whole document and comparing every requirement with every other requirement, it can bring that to their attention and say, hey, these two are similar, so you should take a look at it. So the objective side of the analysis, the quality scoring system, provides direction. As you're writing the requirements, you're actually given feedback on how I can improve this requirement based on an objective standard. The second half provides insight into the requirement itself. So it allows you to look at it from a different perspective, maybe pick out some things that just by reading that black and white text over and over and over wouldn't jump out at you right away. So it's still the, you know, at the discretion of the person reading and reviewing it. So that could be the person who's actually written the requirement or somebody that's charged with reviewing it, but it provides that insight. So on the objective side, this is a value because you can't argue with a computer. So you're not wasting time kind of going back and forth. It's my opinion versus yours. And on the subjective side, the value is you can't argue with a computer. So it's actually the same argument on both, because if you try to take something that is subjective and then apply something like a scoring system to it and say, hey, you need to watch out for this, you know, we're taking points off because you used the word all, for example, the user is going to be frustrated by that because they'll disagree with it and say, no, the tool's wrong, and then move on to the next thing. And the next time they get a warning, they go, well, is this really okay or not? And so you can't take subjective things and impose them and make them objective, but what you can do is take what is inherently in the middle, you know, something that's somewhat objective and make it objective. So in that sense, you know, you're not wasting time going back and forth. And this is something that we hear often from teams that have been using QVscribe for like a year or more, is it's reducing the amount of conversations that need to happen around how to word a particular requirement or how to write it. So we'll jump back into QVscribe for Polarion and spend some time in it to show what this actually looks like. So we looked at sort of the behind the scenes part of it, and I'll get into the practical side of what this actually looks like when you're working through a document. So like I mentioned before, there's a couple of different ways to view requirements within Polarion. So we're currently looking at what's called the table view. So we have the list of requirements here at the top, and then we have a description of the one that I've actually selected and clicked on here listed below. So from here, like I showed before, I can edit the requirement. I actually prefer, if I'm going through line by line and reviewing a whole set of requirements, I prefer the document view within Polarion. So we do support that as well. We basically tied the QVscribe icon to this draft status. So if the requirement is open to be edited, then you'll see the QVscribe icon there. If it's not in draft status, then the icon will not appear. So if I go in and actually look at the properties here, if I were to switch this over to maybe the review has been done, then when I refresh that page, then the QVscribe icon won't be there. So anything that has the icon next to it, it's open to be edited. And this was really important to keep the consistency with the user permissions and the traceability within Polarion. So if someone actually goes in and makes a change using QVscribe, they type in a change to the requirement. From the perspective of Polarion, that's the exact same as somebody changing the text right here within the document itself. So it knows who made that change, when they made it, you still have your history, and they only have the ability to change it within QVscribe if they have that permission within Polarion. So it keeps, it respects all of the systems that are in place with Polarion in terms of user permissions and traceability, and also your, you know, keeping track of who made those changes as well. So from this view, here I can actually change the requirements themselves within QVscribe. So if I'm looking through and I'm reading the requirements and I want to see the score of an individual requirement, I can click on any one of these and it will take me into the quality view. So if I look here, when atrial tachycardia is detected, this is for a pacemaker. So on a broad audience like this, we have to choose an industry and go with it. So you might have to adapt this a little bit to your own industry, but we're looking at the behaviors of a pacemaker here in this document. So we'll start at this one, 660. And I'll just jump right into QVscribe. So right now I'm just looking at this black and white text. Let me bring it into QVscribe and see what it says here. So for this requirement, the detection period shall be long enough that an occasional premature atrial contraction does not cause unnecessary ATR therapy, nor cease ATR therapy upon occasional slow beats. So you can see this one gets a score of 1 out of 5. There's multiple issues present with it. We have a couple of immeasurable quantifications and a couple of optional escape clauses. So the problem with the word occasional is that everybody will have a different interpretation of what is considered occasional and what is considered regular. So, you know, if there is a defined term for that, that changes it a little bit, but in this context, it seems vague to me. And then we also have this phrase, long enough. And so this is not a complete requirement. This might be a placeholder for something else. So most of what's in here would be better served as like a comment. And this is really a TBD. You know, we haven't decided what that period is yet. So if you were to hand this off to somebody in testing to actually verify that this requirement has been met, they couldn't possibly test that it is long enough to do this. So this might be a TBD for the moment. And I can put that in, and it's going to be flagged by QVscribe as a vague term. You can see it gets flagged as soon as I type it in there. But that at least brings it to my attention that I will revisit it later. The other information that's here is basically going to guide that decision on like what that time period is going to be. And we can edit that later. So if I wanted to look at this, maybe I wanted to keep this comment in here. This would be better in like an attribute, like another attribute within Polarion. But if I did for the time being, keep it in here. We have another feature called Exclusion Prefixes. And what that does is it allows you to put notes or comments in that actually get excluded from the analysis. So if I want to look at just the part that I've written on the requirement, maybe I have an old version and a new version that I'm working on. I can put whatever prefix I want. I've chosen note here, and it'll exclude anything in a paragraph that begins with that phrase. So now I'm looking at this requirement and I know that I'm going to have to go back to this later and review it. So when I exit this out, the changes that I've made are updated here within Polarion. They're not committed until I save the document. So again, the normal workflows that you'd have within Polarion are kept intact. When I go down to the next one here, I'll jump this one into QVscribe. And we'll see here, this gets a score of 5 out of 5, but there is a quality warning present, and that's the use of passive voice. So I see the score of 5 out of 5, and it says when atrial tachycardia is detected, the ATR algorithm shall enter an ATR duration state. So passive voice uses natural language processing. So it doesn't always mean that the requirement is poor, so that's why it doesn't impact the score, but it's bringing it to the user's attention. So in this case, it's identified the phrase is detected is passive. And so if I look at the requirement as a whole, though, when atrial tachycardia is detected, the ATR algorithm shall enter the ATR duration state. So the object is still clear. It's the ATR algorithm that's responsible for meeting this requirement. And that's the main reason that you want to avoid passive voice, is to make sure that two people don't read the requirement and think that the other guy is looking after it. So in this case, the passive voice isn't a problem. I've got my score of 5 out of 5. I'll move on to the next one. Let's take a look at this one. Jumping into QVscribe, a score of 3 out of 5. When in ATR duration, the PG shall delay a programmed number of cardiac cycles before entering fallback. So this is where the ears method is really helpful. We do have a guide on our website that you can download for free, the definitive guide to ears. If you're not familiar with it, ears is the easy approach to requirement syntax. The patterns that are from this method are actually can be found in the INCOSI guide as well. They're not labeled as ears, but it's the same. It's basically a structured way of writing requirements where you have the conditions are always at the beginning, and then the system response, what you actually want the thing to do, is located at the end of the requirement. So for a lot of these, it's helpful to think about it from that perspective of when a particular trigger happens or while it's in a particular state, this is the response that I want from the system. And you can see that this requirement is actually ears compliant in that it starts with a when statement. But you'll notice here that it says when, since it starts with when, if you were following the ears method, this would be what's considered an event-driven requirement. So when this happens, this is what I want to have happen. So I can actually look at my ears templates here when this is enabled. So that you can turn this on or off if you're using ears or not. But this is actually a state that the device is in. So I would want a state-driven requirement instead, which if you are following ears would start with while. And so I'll make that little change here just so that this is identified as a state-driven requirement instead. So while in ATR duration, which is a mode, the PG delay shall be programmed a number of cardiac cycles before entering feedback. So the problem here with before is that, and if I highlight it here, I'll go back to all alerts. This is an immeasurable quantification. So before entering feed fallback. So it's not clear on exactly when that's supposed to happen. So this would be better phrased as a condition for the requirement rather than something that's tacked on at the end. So we could have this state while in ATR duration, and then we would then go with when so while in ATR duration, we would go the PG shall delay a program number of cardiac cycles. So not a subject matter expert on this, but basically you put the conditions at the beginning and then work with that requirement until you have all the conditions present there. So you'll see that this one now, there's a little bit more information that I would need to put in there that I need to know more about. But you can see that this one is a state-driven requirement, and using the ears method, it can actually pull out the different pieces of this requirement. So it knows that the precondition that I've listed here is I'm in the ATR duration mode. The system that's responsible for it is this PG component of the system. The imperative is shall, and then the system response is listed there. So the ears method will pull those different pieces out and allow you to look at them and make sure that you have everything accounted for within that requirement. And then we're ready to move on to the next one. So that will update the text here within the tool itself. The next one we have the duration delay shall be terminated immediately and fallback shall be avoided if during the duration delay, the ATR detection algorithm determines that atrial tachycardia is over. So I'm going to open this up in QVscribe, and there's a lot going on here. This one is a bit of a mouthful. So we're talking about different states that the device is in. And in reading this, the duration delay shall be terminated immediately and fallback shall be avoided if the ATR detection algorithm determines that atrial tachycardia is over. So I'm going to start with the warnings for this one. And this is a case where passive voice actually can be a problem. So it's talking about the duration delay, and it's just saying that it shall be terminated. So it's not being clear about who or what is responsible for doing that. Is this something that the physician is supposed to do? Is this something the overall, the CPU, like the main control unit of the system is supposed to do? It's not clear. So just that phrase of saying shall be terminated leaves it open to who's actually supposed to do that. And then we have the same thing again, fallback shall be avoided. And so the main issue with this one and why it gets a score of 1 out of 5 with QVscribe is that we have multiple imperatives present. So you can see I have a shall statement, shall be terminated, fallback shall be avoided. And so I'll go back to ears again as a helpful way to think about this requirement. So we're talking about different states. We're already in this ATR detection state. And then basically it's saying, if it detects this, then you end the duration delay state that it's in, or you avoid going into fallback and you just go straight back into like the normal mode that it's supposed to be in. So by actually giving these two different states, fallback shall be avoided is actually unnecessary because that's another state. And we already know what's going to happen is it's going to go back to normal as the duration delay has ended. So I can be more concise with this requirement by getting rid of the additional shall statement. And again, as I make those changes here within the requirement itself, the score gets updated as I make those. So I'm able to work my way through this requirement and make changes to it as I go. And when I exit it out, those changes will be updated back in the tool itself as we go through there. So I'll close that one out here. And so that's the way that you would work through some documents. You see there's a mixture of quality score issues. This is actually impacting the score. And then there's other issues that are not related to the score itself. So I can see here, if I go down a little bit lower, I just want to pick up one more example here because this is a good one. Our standard configuration includes the word normal as a vague word. And so if I click on this one, I can see the word normal is highlighted here. And in this case, looking at this document, one of the modes for this pacemaker is actually normal. So, I obviously, if I'm saying a requirement that says the pacemaker will work like a normal pacemaker, that's unnecessarily vague and problematic. In this particular document where normal is one of the modes, I probably don't want to be notified every time that the word normal is used. So the way that it's set up within QVscribe is certain users have the ability to go in and actually make changes to these configurations, and then other users can choose between which configuration they want to use, but they can't actually make changes to it. So maybe the person that's writing this requirement would go to their manager and say, hey, I think for this project, we should change the configuration to not include normal because that's going to be flagged every time we have the normal state. So the person that has permission to do that can open the QVscribe extension here, and they actually have a list of the configurations here within the tool itself. So here's where you can control your list of imperatives. This particular warning is on the list of vague words. And so if I scroll down, the ones on the left-hand side here are the what's currently turned on. If I turn this off and hit remove, then this moves over to the list of example words. So if you take something out of the standard configuration, it's never lost. It just goes over into that list of example words, so you can put it back in anytime. It's just temporarily disabled. At the same time, if you're working through a project and maybe there was an old name for a device, or there's a term that used to be really common that we've decided we're not going to use anymore, I can use this add button to add any word that I want on any of these lists. So anything that impacts the quality score can be fully customized by your team to determine, for this project or even as an organization, for our industry and the projects that we work on, this is the language that we're going to follow. And then that's automatically updated across all users. So we keep everybody on the same page with the language that should be used. So like I mentioned, every user has the ability to choose from the available configurations. So these are different configurations set by the configuration authors or the management within your organization to choose which keywords are present for each one. And so then you can work through this process of deciding what's appropriate or not appropriate for your document. So in this case, I've taken the word normal out. And so when I go back to my document, it's going to reanalyze that from the perspective of the configuration that I have open. So the word normal isn't flagged anymore, and now I just have to deal with this word immediately. So this is similar to the problem that we had with the last requirement, where it's saying we're leaving the fallback state, which is in here, and then it's going back to normal. So it's not necessary to say that it's terminated. And even the word immediately, that adds a level of performance to this, which I don't think is the intention. We're basically talking about system behaviors here. It's a non-functional requirement. Or it's a functional requirement, not a non-functional requirement. So in this case, we're just describing the behavior of the system. As soon as you put in that word immediately, well, now it's a performance thing. Now you need to measure, okay, does this actually happen immediately? And that is, of course, impossible to test, and it's impossible to meet. If you have a system, there's always going to be a delay there. So if there is a specific time constraint here, you need to have this within 0.5 seconds or something like that. Replace that word immediately with what you mean instead of just saying immediately. And then in this particular context, I think it's more clear if you just say the mode will be switched back to normal, and just saying that fallback is terminated is not necessary. So we can be more concise by just getting to the point. When this happens, it's switched to normal, or the state will change to normal would be an even better way of saying that. So I'll close that out here. We do have a question in the chat here. Do you advocate using normal with a capital N to show a defined word? Yes. Yeah, keep the questions coming too. We will have a chance at the end here to get through them. I would encourage, if you're talking about a state or any term that you have a definition for, use a capital letter. The definitions within the QVscribe library of words that it flags are not case sensitive, but the term consistency that we're going to look at in a second is. So that will actually help you enforce that. If you're looking at two terms that are exactly the same, except one has a lowercase and one has an uppercase, that can make sure that when you're using these defined words that you are using them consistently. So this is probably a good time to jump over to that part of the analysis. So this is looking at individual requirements. At the top here, either in the document view, or if I go back over to the table view, this will show me all of the requirements in this whole set. So Polarion has this neat feature where from either of these views, I can actually pull up these filters, and I can look at only requirements that have a particular status. Maybe I want to see the requirements that are in draft. And now I had one in the other one that wasn't. So now I'm down to 159 requirements. So whatever filters you want to use about who's responsible for the requirement or what state it's in, what the current status is, you can put in as many filters as you want to get the exact list of requirements that you want to analyze. We typically test Pardon me. We typically test the tool with a set of 3,000 requirements. So that's typically the threshold. If you go above that, it can have some performance issues, but you can analyze a whole set of requirements into the thousands and look at those together. So you can use these filters to build the view. And then when you pull up QVscribe, this gives me that dashboard view that we showed at the beginning that shows the individual score of each requirement. Everything here is clickable. So if I want to see the requirements that have a 4 out of 5, I can go and see that on the list. Then I can jump back to the other view and look at the overall summary dashboard here again. And then within this as well, there's different ways to filter and view this. So if I want to look at all the ones that have a score of 3 out of 5, I can do that. And also filter by the actual issues. So if I want to see all of the requirements that have multiple imperatives, so it has a shall and a will, or there's 2 shall statements, I can just work my way through those documents and look at those one at a time. And I can filter by any other issue or score as well. If I go to no filter, that takes me to the view where I can see the whole set. I can then sort these by order of appearance or warning count. So there's different ways that you can go through the information and work through it more efficiently because you're dealing with the same issue one at a time. So if I jump to this requirement here, I'll jump into one, oops, go back to my view here. We'll take one that we were looking at here. So if we bring this one up and it's a 2 out of 5, since we came to this through the summary view, so it actually pulled this information off of the Polarian database using their API, this text is not editable, and that's because of the user permissions. So we've just pulled all of the text that's currently in that set of requirements that you've looked at, but it's not verifying if you have permission to edit this or not. So to actually go and make changes to this, I can actually click this icon here to go to that requirement location. It will pop me into a new tab where now if this requirement is editable and I have permission to edit, I can go in and make changes to it here and even jump into the QVscribe view to get at it from there as well. So that's looking at the overall quality of the whole set of requirements. And then from this view, we also have the other, go to quality review here, our term consistency. So this uses natural language processing to pull out all of the terms that are used in the document, and it gives those to you in list form. So that question about using a capital N, if I look for any requirements that are the highest % match, it will actually show me a comparison of which ones are capitalized and which ones aren't, and it'll show them as 100% match. So you can use this to make sure that anything that does have a definition that you are following a defined term, that you're actually capitalizing it every time if that is something that you chose to do. But it also shows me other similar terms. So for example, this one, atrial events, has another term that's similar, but 95% similar, and they're actually right on top of each other. So I can go through this list and say, oh, we're talking about atrial events, and we're also talking about atrial sense in some places. Atrial event would also be similar to that. So I can use this to basically make sure that the language that I'm using is consistent. It's also a pretty easy way to find things like typos, or if you have a dash in between one term in one place and not another. But more importantly from this list, what I like to use it for is to look for the number of occurrences and actually just look through and say, hey, I've used device here 22 times, but then I'm also talking about some requirements say system. So if the system shall do this, what's the difference between the system doing it versus the device doing it? Maybe there is a distinction there, but you want to make sure if you're using both of those terms that they're being used consistently. You could also say, maybe I wanted to search for pacemaker here because, hey, the device is the pacemaker. So if we're talking about the device, we want to be consistent with that. And then you also notice here that when I type pacemaker, we have this different pacemaker device listed here as well. So you want to make sure that each of those terms are being used consistently so that you're not, making unnecessary work or designing the wrong sort of interface. So something that jumped out to me about this document, it's only about 160 requirements here, but it actually uses the phrase user in some places, as you can see if I highlight that here. We see that on the list most of the time we're talking about the user, but we're also talking about the physician, and we're also talking about, if I could spell that, physician, and also talking about the patient. So when we're talking about a physician and a patient, and then we talk about a user, who's the user of the pacemaker? That might not be clear. Maybe it's something that connects to a mobile app and they're able to, the patient would be able to view information on that. If you're not clear about who this actually applies to, then that can create a whole bunch of work that's not actually needed, or you could actually miss a really important requirement with an error like that. Next one is unit consistency. So this will pull out all of the units that were used in the document and actually allow you to jump to them to see. So if I wanted to see every time that ohm is used, that would take me to those requirements. I can actually jump into the requirement itself and see that as well. And then I can filter these. So if I want to look at everything that's consistent with the International System of Units, we'll see we have minutes, volts, ohms, centimeters. Those are all highlighted here. And then I can also look at what's inconsistent. And you'll notice link comes up in this document. So I have a sneaking suspicion that that's not a unit. So if I click on it, you can see breaking the telemetry link. That's not a unit that we use. So you can actually edit that as well. So that list of, that's actually a part of the configurations. So in our list of unit consistency, you can see everything that's consistent and inconsistent with the International System of Units. So again, this is the starting point, but you can make changes to this, add your own units, add your own abbreviations that you use for those units as well. And then you can actually just toggle them on and off. If there's one that you want to add or remove, you can just see it from that list there. And if I uncheck link, then that will no longer appear in the summary report when I bring that up. So that's the term and unit consistency. And then lastly, we're going to get into questions in just a second here. We'll also look at the similarity. So similarity analysis, like I mentioned off the top, this shows me requirements that are most similar to one another and allows me a really easy way to find requirements that are potentially contradictory or might be missing information, or maybe just unnecessary. I've added too many, repeated the same requirement and I don't need them. So if I look at highest percent matched here, you'll see that I do have two requirements that are exactly the same. Both say the ventricular sensitivity shall have a value of 1.5. If you're working in a document, this isn't really a problem, but when you're working with a requirements management tool, maybe you're making that transition where you have some teams that are still using Word and Excel and others that have moved into Polarian, and you're in that transition process. This is something that can cause big problems in a requirements management tool, because the goal is to be able to reuse these requirements on different projects. So if I click into this, and I might want to actually look at this in the document view to see the context of what might be missing here in this requirement. So I'll open this in the document view. And I can see for this particular one, every other requirement around it is talking about this POR. So that's a state, the power on reset state. And all of those include that detail in the requirements themselves, but this one's just missing that information. So the reason that I have two identical requirements is it's true for the power on reset state, and it's also true for the pace now state. So I can quickly go in and make that change to it when I find the exact matches, but it's also helpful for finding similar requirements. So if I click on 2 here, you can see there's a purple highlight in the differences here. And that allows me to quickly see, hey, these two requirements are 87% similar. I can see where they're different. And again, not saying that this is good or bad, but it brings it to the user's attention so that they can quickly work through this list and find any potentially conflicting or contradictory requirements or repetitive requirements. And so if I sort these by number of highest percent match, sorry, and you'll see that they're grouped together. So the two that are 92% similar are similar with each other. So just from reading this list, I can quickly scroll through and see all of the requirements that are most similar to one another and check for those sorts of inconsistencies. So this is something that would take hours and hours and hours to do manually. And for some projects that is necessary. So this would actually accelerate that process, but it allows you even at checkpoints during the project to look at the consistency of the document as a whole. So we're coming up near the end here. So I'm going to jump on to a couple of questions. Will there be a possibility to insert a quality indicator near to the requirement in different views? For example, the live talk, table view, tree view without opening the QVscribe pane? Yeah, that's a great question. So as it is right now, we've kept the QVscribe experience consistent across different tools, and that's something that we didn't get a chance to get into today, but Rebecca will maybe cover it on hers, is that these configurations that you have, when you make changes within Polarian, within QVscribe for Polarian, for example, those are synced across all platforms. So your users that are working in Microsoft Word and Excel, maybe you've exported some requirements or are working with another document, you can actually view those same configurations from any tool. If you have users that are using doors, some teams are using doors and other teams are using Polarion. They actually share a common list of configurations, and you can actually share licenses between those tools as well if you have a license for both products. So that allows your teams across multiple industries to be able to, or across multiple different projects and different tools to be able to have the same access to the same configurations. So as it is now, when you're looking at the summary view here, and I'll go back to the QVscribe summary view. If I wanted to look at the overall quality of this document, this is the view that I would jump to, because then you can see the quality scores next to each requirement itself. It certainly is possible with the APIs that Polarion has to be able to insert the icons there as well. It's not something that we've implemented yet or that we're working on. The workflow that we'd use for that is this, this view that you have here, and that's to keep it consistent across all of the different tools. Another question was, how do you control who can make changes, and how do you collaborate with stakeholders who are denied the ability to make changes directly? So that's a great question. So if this document isn't open for editing, or somebody doesn't have permission to make changes to it, how can they get to the quality analysis? And that's where the summary view comes in, again, the one that I have open here. So if you have QVscribe installed, since this part doesn't require edit permissions, you can pull up the QVscribe summary view, this view here, and look at the quality score of any requirement that you want without needing permission to be able to go in and edit it. So if you're maybe looking at a document that's already been closed, you can go into this view. If it's already been approved, you can go into this view to look at anything to see if it might need to be opened again, or maybe you're in the process of you're going to review this but haven't started yet. You can absolutely use this summary view, and it will bring up any requirement that has a description so that you can view the quality score there. That's a great question as well. And if there are any other questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. If you don't have a contact here at QRA, you can reach out to me directly, james@qracorp.com. I'll have my email address here at the end of the video. And just to wrap up, how this translates back into the real world. So, we talked about how it can save time in the process of reviewing your requirements and improve the quality overall. Just some research that's been done on this. Typically, 3 times faster quality reviews if you're going through the process of manually checking for something like misused imperatives. So manually reading through each requirement, making sure that everyone has one and only one shall statement as an example, can be done 3 times faster with QVscribe. So if you're working on a large project, that time adds up pretty quickly. Even another similar example would be from our consistency analysis. So if you were to manually go through a document and check for the consistent use of terms and units, even just looking at the units, you can see a manual review. As the document size increases, the manual review becomes more and more tedious, whereas the amount of time it takes to review a large document using QVscribe quality analysis and looking at the unit consistency, it raises slightly, but it's pretty much the same amount of time no matter the size of document. So as you're working on larger, more complex projects, QVscribe is a much faster way to make sure that your units are being used consistently. And then the benefits that go beyond just working with the requirements themselves, and it's not just for the purpose of having great requirements, like we said at the start, these project delays that can happen because of poorly written requirements have real world impacts on your projects. So this quote from Shell, that QVscribe is helping Shell engineers write high quality requirements to ensure consistency and to ensure clarity across their projects and supply chain, which significantly reduces the number of questions and clarifications from their suppliers and enables more efficient execution of projects. So Shell is one of our customers that's been moving over to Polarion. So they're in that process now of rolling it out across different groups, and are rolling out QVscribe for Polarion as well. And so they've been using it within Word and Excel previously, but the amount of time that's saved in these with such a deep supply chain that they have, the amount of time that it saves on a project of not having to answer as many questions, because everybody can read the requirements for the project and be clear on what it is that's expected, has been a huge time, and as you can imagine, a huge financial savings for them as well on the projects that have been using QVscribe. And quickly to review some information for your IT administrator. So the way that we've built this integration integration with Polarion, we do have the server-side API extension. It's a servlet that runs in the Polarion environment. That's a one installation of this extension, but everything is actually powered by the browser extension. So this is installed on the local workstation, so it has a deep integration with Polarion, but we don't get into needing to interface with your user permissions or access to it or anything like that. The user is authenticated through Polarion, so they're logged in as a Polarion user, and then they're authenticated through QVscribe, and so that QVscribe license can be used with as many different management tools as your organization has purchased access to. So if you have Word and Excel and Polarion, a user can use their license in either of those environments, and it's all kept from the same list. So we can use your Microsoft Active Directory for like a single sign-on, or you can create usernames and passwords or a combination of the two. But that's important that your data doesn't leave the local workstation. So the analysis is actually happening right there on the workstation. So when we take the information that's in your documents and run the analysis on it, it's not being shipped off to another server somewhere. It's not coming back to us. Nobody outside of your organization can see that information. It stays right there on the local workstation. The only information that is transmitted over your own internal network is just the authentication, and then also the analysis configurations, which are kept synchronized through the QVscribe server application. And like I mentioned earlier, we do have support for Chrome, and Edge support is coming very soon. So you'll be able to access QVscribe and install that extension in either of those environments. And then, as I mentioned, all QVscribe users are managed in one place. So if there's interest in exploring this further, we're happy to set up a call with your IT group to talk about this, or with your Polarion representative. You can also find us on the Polarion extension library. The URL is a little bit long, but if you just search QVscribe and Polarion, that'll get you there. And keep in mind, we do also have an upcoming tutorial next week with Rebecca Labby. She's going to be presenting our integration with Doors Next, so talking about how to access QVscribe from that tool as well. And certainly, if you're using that tool, or if you're working with Polarion and Doors Next, certainly come out to that as well. The user interface is common between those tools, so you won't need to learn everything over again to use QVscribe within that different environment. But it's helpful to see the way that we've interacted with the artifacts and different work item types, as they have work items within Polarion. They have artifacts with Doors, so it's a little bit different in how we interact with them. But certainly come out next week at the same time to be on this webinar with Rebecca. If you're watching the recording, then we'll have the recording of that one available as well. So our site for QVscribe for Polarion, qricorp.com/QVscribe for Polarion, as you can see there. And we will be sending out an email to those of you that registered beforehand. You'll get a survey for an email with the survey link. You can always visit, if you just watched this in the recording, you can visit info.qracorp.com/Polarion-tutorial-survey, and that will take you right to that page where you can give your feedback on this. And we'd really love to hear your opinion on it and what you thought. And of course, if you'd like to know more about the integration, we'd welcome you to get in touch, and we can give a personalized demo for you. We can even provide a sample report on one of your documents if you think that would be helpful, and go through in a little bit more detail exactly how you think QVscribe can help your group in particular. So again, my name is James Carr. You can reach me at james.carr@qracorp.com. My phone number is listed there as well. And of course, visit us on the web. So thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care.